Welcome, everybody. We're just going to let all of you come into this virtual theater, this virtual room, and we're going to wait until we see those numbers come up, and then we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We're going to get started in just a minute. Just going to let folks come into the room. Welcome, everybody. All right, so it's 8 o'clock, and that's our scheduled time to start. So we are going to get going. And so just want to say hi to everybody and welcome. My name is Andrea Miller. I am the director of the JCC Ames Amzalek Rochester Jewish Film Festival, generously underwritten by the Rubens Family Foundation and the William and Sheila Konar Foundation. We thank them very much for their ongoing generosity, and to all of our other donors this year in particular. We thank you very, very much. These are extraordinary times that we're living in, and we didn't want our 20th anniversary to go unnoticed and uncelebrated, so we decided to put on this little mini festival, and we're so grateful to so many of you for responding and attending. We've got hundreds of you attending films throughout the week, and for that we're very, very grateful. So thank you all for being here tonight. You will see that I am here. Tonight was meant to be moderated by Ralph Moranto, the Center Stage Artistic Director. And unfortunately, sadly, Ralph's father passed away over the weekend. We all send him our condolences and have him in mind tonight. So I am stepping in. And the gentleman to my left, I don't know where he is on your screen, in this crazy Brady Bunch world, is actually a fellow Brighton High School graduate. He graduated just 1 year ahead of me, with my brother, who probably many of you know. And so we want to give a nice warm welcome to Bruce Sabbath. And I am going to tell you just a little bit about Bruce before we start our conversation. And yes, Max, the director of Fiddler, Miracle of Miracles, is going to join us. But funny enough, Max double booked tonight. So he right now is spending a little bit of time at the New Jersey Jewish Film Festival, and he's going to quickly hop over and join us probably in about 15 minutes or so if technology cooperates and if New Jersey lets him go.
We hope he doesn't hit traffic.
We hope he doesn't hit traffic. I said to Bruce earlier, I've never had a guest ever double book before, because of course to get on an airplane you can't be two places at once. So so we are going to patiently wait for Max to join us, and in the meantime Bruce and I are going to start the conversation. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Bruce. He is a New York based actor working in theater, film, TV, and commercials. He played Larry in the 2006-2007 Tony Award revival of Stephen Sondheim's Company. And in July of 2018, which is why we're chatting with him tonight, he originated the role of Laser Wolf while also understudying Tevye in the historic hit production of Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish. It was first at the Jewish Heritage Museum in New York's Battery Park, and then moved over to Stage 42 on 42nd Street. The show wrapped up its off-Broadway run on January 5th, 2020. So interesting timing there. And it was actually the longest running show at that off-Broadway theater. And Bruce recently performed in New York in the off-Broadway musical Cagney at the West Side Theater, and Stephen Sondheim's Follies, and the award-winning revival of Hello Again. His credits go on and on and on, but we're going to get to our conversation, and I'm sure we'll fill in some of the blanks as well. So welcome, Bruce.
Great to be here. Great to be back in Rochester virtually.
Virtually, yes. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm
Good. And where are you other than, I'm guessing, a kitchen?
yes, I'm in my kitchen in Katona, New York, which is in Westchester County. I'm about 45 miles north of Midtown. It's when there's no traffic, you can get there in about 50 minutes. But you usually might take the train, you might drive, but that's where I am now. We've been here for about 20 years in this lovely house.
20 years and probably more time than usual the past 4 months.
That is for sure. I spent a lot of time at this very kitchen table, probably more in the last 3 months than I have in the last like 5 years put together. Doing a lot of projects here.
Yeah.
The biggest project was actually, and I'm still working on it, is digitizing old videotapes.
Ah,
Yeah.
well, you might have a customer here.
Believe me, when I'm done with the gazillion, here's just a sample, but that I have many, many more.
Wow.
But it's a fun quarantine project.
That's a great project. You were also sharing with me another great project that you were working on. Can you tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, you're talking, I think, about Broadway Goes Viral. When Broadway shut down on March 12th, I was actually here at this table and thinking that my colleagues would be really missing the opportunity to perform, and that audiences would be missing the opportunity to see the creativity of performers. And so I created a Facebook and Instagram site called Broadway Goes Viral, which had two goals. One was really to try to showcase performances by Broadway, off-Broadway, and regional theater performers, whether it was a cover of a theater song or an original song or um, um, parodies. A lot of people were doing parodies, dance performances, all kinds of things. And we were putting them all on Broadway Goes Viral on both Facebook and Instagram. And we were also trying to raise money for Broadway Cares, Equity Fights AIDS, which had reoriented its fundraising to try to help people who were suffering from COVID-19. And they were in the process of trying to raise a couple $1 million to try to help people who were dealing with medical costs and all kinds of costs that are related to the shutdown of our industry and the illnesses that people have had.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish.
Yes.
So, Bruce, do you speak Yiddish?
I don't speak Yiddish. I probably speak Yiddish about as well as you speak Yiddish, and about as well as most of the people watching speak Yiddish, which is, a vocabulary of maybe 30 words, meshuggah and the usual. And most of the cast had similar level of Yiddish expertise. We had a few people in the cast who actually did have some serious Yiddish knowledge, but most of us did not. And so this is common at the Folksbiene. They, a long time ago, decided they would rather hire actors who they wanted to hire rather than limiting themselves to people who already knew Yiddish. So they developed a very sophisticated Yiddish coaching regimen, basically, where they would have the script in Yiddish on one line, followed by, right under that line, the translation in English. And in this case, there was a third line because, the Yiddish words that we were speaking, if you translated them directly, weren't exactly the same as the familiar words that we all knew from the book and the lyrics from the original production of Fiddler on the Roof. So there was a third line, which was the words we kind of expected to see, which if you put the Yiddish next to them, didn't exactly line up. So it enabled us to learn the Yiddish, know exactly what we were saying word for word, as well as know what was the phrase that we might have been more familiar with if we had, as many of us had, done or seen, Fiddler on the Roof a million times before. But it was quite the challenge, and we had great coaches. That we had two people whose main job it was to actually work with us one-on-one for the few weeks before we even started rehearsal, going through the lines, going through the scenes where we would be speaking our lines, they would do the other lines, just like you would if you were running lines in any show. But they knew exactly what the Yiddish, they were real Yiddish scholars, so they could answer all of our questions and help us to learn it.
And how much time did that add to rehearsal time?
Well, we didn't really get to add much time, really. But basically, there was an efficiency that was taken advantage of, because a lot of time in rehearsal, you've got a bunch of people who are working on a scene or a song or a choreography, and then you've got people who aren't working on anything at that moment. So whenever those people were having downtime, the Yiddish coaches would be like, "Okay, come on, let's go," and we would always be drilling Yiddish. And I had sort of an advantage/disadvantage in that I had studied German at Brighton High School, so I had a very strong German knowledge, and a lot of Yiddish is, Yiddish and German basically come from the same ancient,
Sure.
Language. Modern German comes from ancient German, and the root of that tree, spawned both modern German and Yiddish. So
Sure.
a lot of similarities, but I would always pronounce things wrong. I would pronounce them in the German way instead of the Yiddish way, and I would constantly have to, remind myself, no, it's not das, it's dos. Not all the pronunciations were slightly different, so it took a while to figure that out.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I'm going to ask you if you would give us a tiny little piece of something in Yiddish, but before we do that, I just want to mention, if you have any questions, just put them right in the Q&A as opposed to the chat. Any questions that you've got, I'm going to keep an eye on the Q&A, and we'll include you guys as we go along. And again, we're waiting for Max, the director of Fiddler Miracle of Miracles, to join us, because he's with the New Jersey Jewish Film Festival right now, for those of you who joined us a little bit late. So we're waiting for Max to pop in, and I'm sure everybody will join me in our excitement to hear a little bit of Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish live with Bruce Sabbath.
Sure. So as Andrew was saying before, I also, in addition to playing Laser Wolf, I understudied the role of Tevye, and that's a role that I had played many times in my history from middle school, high school, college, and finally about 5 years ago, I actually played it as an adult the first time in English in St. Louis. But it's a role that I've always loved, and so it was a real pleasure to be able to get to go on as Tevye about 30 times during the course of our run. And so, of course, I would like to do now Tevye's favorite song from the show, If I Were a Rich Man, which is in Yiddish, Wenn ich bin ein Rothschild, which is not a direct translation, because Rothschild does not mean rich man. Rothschild means Rothschild. What Tevye is saying, if only I was a Rothschild, because, of course, at that time, in the time of Sholem Aleichem, at the turn of the 20th century, the Rothschilds were the wealthiest family, the wealthiest Jewish family known to the world. And so he had his own perspective on what that would be like. So I'm going to sing Wenn ich bin der Rothschild in Yiddish. Rebbeinu Shalom, hast noch beschaffene Welt mit Orem und Leid. Und weiß ich doch, es ist gar nicht kein Schande zu sein an eurem Mann. Aber ein größer Covid ist das richtig. Ist was wollt gewinnen so schlecht, wenn ich wollte Yoga hat, ein kleiner Oizer. Wenn ich bin ein Rothschild, Ganze Tag wollte ich sich für die Baum, wenn ich bin ein reicher Mann. Hand im kalten Wasser, nicht reingetan über die Deine. Rot gehabt, ein Deitel Geld, ungewinner Edelmann. Und ich wollte mir aufgebeut, a Holz wie ein Palast, darf kein mitten von der Stadt. A schönem Dach und a Käumen, was bloß da reich. A lange Treppe von Holz mit Läufen Räuf, a zweite noch länger läuft aber. A dritte läuft, ich weiß noch nicht wie euch. Uns wird meine Häuf sein voll mit Katschkes und Geld, die Sonne macht Platz in Sonnensee. Von dem Krähen fähren die euren Miete. Und jeder, was ist denn? Ich hab gelegt ein Ei. Und es ist noch als da weint a reicher Hieb. Wenn ich bin Rothschild, hey, gut die dahin, ganze Tag wollte ich sich mit die Bob, wenn ich bin ein reicher Mann. Hand in kalten Wasser, nicht reingetan über die Deine. Gewalt gehabt, hat dein Beutel Geld, ungewinner Edelmann. Oh, dies mein Weib, mein Golde, setz schon nice Gewirte, geht mit der Geuder, mit der Beuch. Macht das Sinnes, Stamm in der Brust, den Tag. Sie wischt den Schweiß und sie bloß sich, geht schon wie ein Pave, oh, es geht von ihrer Reich. Schatten aller Diensten, Bataillon, was tust du denn, geh her! Von jeder Gewehren Stadt wird kommen so und fragen mir, kommt wie bei Schleunach am Melech, geht ihr nicht zu mir gebet, kratzt die Bord, Repterje, so der Bord, Repterje, ach die Scheile zeigt, der auf die Päs dreht, hey, my Sie's war sicher schon noch gemine, sie meinen verwundert haben. Vers ist reich versteht, gesund ist euch. Wenn ich bin reich, ob ich sich Zeit und ich geh dreimal Tag in Schul rein. Und ich kauft mir eine Stadt bei der Misrechwand. Und ich lerne Schass und Poskin mit die fromme Jiden. Gotten, wenn wird das sein? Efter nur in unser heilig Land. Wenn ich bin Rothschild, hey, die Deine. Ganze Tag wollte ich sich mit die Baum, wenn ich bin ein reicher Mann. Den kalten Wasser, nicht reingetan über die Deine. Gott, was warft von Himmel und der Mann, beschließt, ich bleib an eurem Mann. Was wollt schon gestellt bei dir den Plan? Denn ich bin ein reicher Mann.
Oh, that's so wonderful. That's so wonderful.
Thank you.
You sing in Yiddish.
Thank you so much. Max is here.
I'm here.
Oh, that's so.
Hey.
That was
Bruce, I
so.
came in just at the right moment. Uh, it was wonderful. Have you played it on in Yiddish someplace?
Yeah, well, I was in the most recent revival of Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish in New York.
Oh,
Steven Skybell played Tevye. I played Laser Wolf, but I was the understudy for Tevye, and I got to go on about 30 times over the course of the run while we were in Midtown. So it was once you get it, it sticks.
forever, forever. It becomes part of you.
Indeed.
There's no question about it. I'm putting on my headphones.
Max, welcome. I'm Andrea Miller. I'm the director of the festival, and this is Bruce Sabbath, who happens to be a native of Rochester. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I put on my headphones and they wouldn't go on.
That's
Thank
okay.
God for both. So
That's
could you
okay.
repeat that?
Sure, yes. I'm just introducing myself. I'm Andrea. I'm the director of the festival.
Hey, Andrea.
We spoke this afternoon. And Bruce Sabbath, who you just met, is also a native of Rochester. So lots of friends. We went to the same high school. And so we're just catching up a little bit. And obviously, we just heard him sing. And so, Max, I want to give you a prop. Sorry?
How did you get him to sing? Did they just ask you, or did you just start to?
Well, we knew that you were going to be late, and so I had this little track that I've actually, as you can imagine, the cast of Fiddler has done many Zoom calls since the close of our show in January during this period. So I happen to have a sort of a karaoke track of the show of Rich Man. So I thought, oh well, as long as we're here, might as well sing the song.
Good for you! Wow, it's great. Oh my goodness. No matter how many times you hear it, in whatever language you hear it, it sticks with you. It's so magical.
Yeah.
Yes. Max, I'm just going to take a moment and introduce you, okay?
Okay.
By the way, how is New Jersey?
How is New Jersey?
Weren't you just at the New Jersey Jewish Film Festival?
Oh, we just finished. They kept on asking questions. I had to get away, and I wasn't in New Jersey.
No, I
know. I'm just being a little facetious.
Yes.
Silly. Yeah.
Where are you actually?
I was in New Jersey. I said, I'm on the Upper West Side, Columbus Avenue. Yeah. No. They had a good crowd. I mean, I just saw a lot of faces on the Zoom.
Oh, they have an open Zoom on there.
Yeah.
It's not a webinar.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
No,
So ours is a webinar. We can't see our people. Okay, let me tell them who you are.
Okay.
Max Lukowitz, am I saying that right?
Yes, you are.
Okay. He is the director of Fiddler, Miracle of Miracles, founder and owner of Dog Green Productions, has written, directed, and produced hundreds of productions for network and public television, museums, multinational organizations, in a career that has spanned more than 25 years.
It's 30 now, but I don't want to extend it anymore.
30 now, but who's counting? It's a bigger number is better.
Yeah, that's
good. It's good. He has made films about mercury pollution afflicting Native American tribes in northern Canada, the Dance Theater of Harlem, the generational cycles of poverty in America's inner cities, Nelson Mandela's struggle against apartheid in South Africa, as well as Across the Bridge, a documentary about the American military doctrine in Germany during the Cold War, and Ours to Fight For, which tells the stories of American GIs in World War II. And Fiddler, Miracle of Miracles, is winning all sorts of recognition, and it opened the very well-respected and esteemed San Francisco Jewish Film Festival last summer. So we are really thrilled to have you with us, Max, and Bruce, of course. And so I'm just going to start off and ask you just a couple of questions, and hopefully we'll get into a little dialogue here. I'm also keeping an eye on the Q&A. And there have been a couple of questions for you, Bruce, and we'll come back to that. But Max, can you just tell us a little bit about the inception for the film and how you came to it? And
Well, my wife was head of programming for the Holocaust Museum downtown and public programs. And she said to me one evening, I know you love Fiddler on the Roof. Well, there's a new revival opening up. This was 2015. There's a new revival opening up. And a bunch of the people that are in the show are going to come down and they'll sing some songs. And, you know, Danny Burstyn, who plays Tevye, is going to be there, and a whole bunch of kids. And Sheldon might be there. Now, Sheldon Harnick is a neighbor of mine up here on the block, but I didn't know him. But I have this affinity for old men. I don't want that to sound very gross, but no, I love somebody who reaches that point in their life where they want to tell you things. They want to tell you stories. They want to tell you what they experienced. Very early on, they may not want to. If they were Holocaust survivors, they wouldn't want to. If they were veterans during the war, they wouldn't want to. But later, they want to. And so I came to him and I heard him speak, and he was telling this wonderful story about him and Jerome Robbins. And I said to him later, Sheldon, you're a great storyteller. Would you mind if I do some interviews with you? Film interviews. And he said, no, absolutely, absolutely. And so we started. And then the story started to develop. And the certain thing that I didn't want to do was the making of Fiddler on the Roof for Broadway. A film just about the making of it, but it had to include some of that. But I wanted to tell a story about what Fiddler on the Roof means to the world and why it's lasted so long, and why it plays in so many different languages. Like it says at the beginning of the film, Joel Grey says, everybody thinks it's about them, you know. So it's a magical thing, you know. And I still love it. And I ask the show every night, do you love me? And it says yes. Sorry, that wasn't that funny.
I want to get to some questions from some folks, and somebody has a question in here, and I'm not sure it's a terribly fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you have a favorite Tevye.
That's interesting because in the last interview they asked the same thing. Favorite Tevye in all media, like movies.
You can make up the rest. You can make up the rest of the question.
Well, Chaim is one of the best. He does it in a different way than everybody else. I haven't seen Bruce play Tevye, but I became friends with Steven Skybell, and he's brilliant. Steven is a phenomenal Tevye. He has the passion, and he throws his body and his face and his arms, and he's, to me, the closest thing to Tevye that, and I've seen dozens and dozens and dozens of versions of it all around the world, and he's special. So I told him that a number of times. When I introduced him to Chaim Topol, we brought Chaim in to do an interview, and Chaim came with his son from Israel, and I said, Tevye meet Tevye.
Bruce, a couple of people are asking what your thoughts are on why the success of Fiddler in Yiddish, and what are your thoughts on that? And I'd also like you to talk a little bit about the evolution of the audience over the course of the play.
Mm-hmm. I think obviously Fiddler is based on stories written over 100 years ago by Shalom Aleichem, which were written in Yiddish about these Jews in the shtetl. And there's a long history, of course, of how the Tevye stories were evolved and how they were, there were stories. They tried to make them into plays. There were early films, all in Yiddish, and then there was an English version in the 50s, and then finally, we got to the English version of Fiddler as created by the gentlemen, Bach and Harnick and Stein. And I think that on a large scale, doing it in Yiddish made people, even if they couldn't understand the words, even if they didn't speak Yiddish, it made people feel like all of a sudden they were a fly on the wall back in the shtetl. Because now here these people were speaking in their own language, much closer to the words that Shalom Aleichem actually wrote in the original stories. So there's that. I think also, for people, and I think that Max's appreciation of Steve and of Topol's Tevye is related to the fact that most people's experience with Fiddler on the Roof are in larger productions, unless you live in regional towns where you get to see smaller productions where people can actually play realer Tevyes. But on Broadway, Tevyes have sort of been forced, because of the venue, to be a little too big. And I think that it was Joel Gray's goal to make our Fiddler a little bit more real. There was no shtick. That was by design. And so the play all of a sudden became almost like real people, real characters talking in their own language right in front of you. And I think people were just sort of blown away by that experience.
Yeah. Max, the film is so rich, and I feel like you covered almost any question that somebody or thought that people have had over these decades with Fiddler. But there's often a lot of film and footage that's left on the cutting room floor, and I'm wondering if there's anything that you can share with us that we would like to know about, that we might like to know about Fiddler that you really wanted in the film. Anything there?
Well, there's a lot of stuff. It's funny, the expression on the cutting room floor. It makes me feel so old, because I used to cut films where you let the work print fall on the floor.
Sure.
But now it's all digital. I think, whenever you do a film, you puff it up and you make it, bigger than it is, and you try to capture all the good pieces and all that, but you can't fit everything in. So there was a lot of animation that Tess Martin did. She's an American who lives in Rotterdam, and I wanted her to create animation that looked like Chagall, sort of
beautiful
oil colors too. And she has this technique where she paints on glass. And so she has all this animation, which is wonderful, of Tevye yelling at his horse, that song Sheldon wrote. And Sheldon wrote it and showed it to Jerome Robbins, and Jerome Robbins said, "That's really great song, but I'm not going to put a horse on the stage." And he says, "And you know why." And there was a show a couple of weeks later where they did have a horse on the stage, and he was right. So we do have a lot of different pieces that Sheldon and which they wrote, and they didn't know where it was going to go in the show, and we had a whole bunch of pieces that we have in the movie. But there's tons of stuff. We could make another film. We could make another film. I'm surprised people haven't asked, who's the guy on the roof playing the fiddle?
On the roof playing the fiddle.
Yeah. Is that a question? No, because
that's a question.
A lot of people sort of asked, and I said it's Sheldon Harnick
Oh.
on my roof right here in the building that I'm in.
Oh.
And when I was starting my interviews with him, and we did hours and hours and hours, and I'm going to give it to the Lincoln Center Library, but he talked about studying classical violin in Chicago, and he wanted to be a violinist, and then he stopped talking about it because he had to make money, and he had to write songs for Broadway, and then it was funny because I said, "Do you still play violin?" And he says, "Well, maybe just a little." And I said, "Could you get your violin?" And it was like totally out of tune. In fact, we laid in, I don't want to even tell you.
No.
It was him really at the end. That was definitely him, right?
That was definitely him.
After the credits.
After the credits, it was. And he sort of loved it, and so he was on the roof. So there's a million different things that happened, as they do in everything, and that's what makes it fun. But it also makes you have to kill your babies, as we call it in the film industry. It's a horrible statement, huh?
I'm having a tiny bit of trouble hearing you, Max.
Oh, I'll get closer.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
Better.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bruce, did you know that this film was being made?
I did during the course of the show, because I knew that Steve was doing some interviews, and he was actually talking and singing as part of the documentary. But I didn't get to see it until well after we closed. And there was I remember because it came, there was an opening in New York, and of course none of us could go because we were doing Fiddler. And it wasn't really until January, I think, that I finally got to see it, and I loved it. And then I, of course, just got to watch it within the last few days again. And it's great to get to experience it again. It's such a great piece.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you had wondered about and might want to ask Max?
I'm not worthy.
You're not what?
Worthy.
No, I was just sort of amazed by how much you were able to fit into a 90-minute documentary, because I have, having Fiddler's been a part of my life, forever, and I've read books and I know a lot of the history, and you captured some really fantastic stuff. I loved the story about the school in Brooklyn that did Fiddler in, I guess it was like 69, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I knew that Sheldon and I guess, was it Stein went to see it?
I think Sheldon Stein and Hal Prince.
I had heard the story about them having gone to see it, and I'd read the stories about the show itself, and that was such a uplifting sort of piece of history about the show.
Yeah, that's a lovely part of the story and all that. But the fact is that I've seen it now in so many different countries, and people just connect to it. There's nothing more to say that could make that feel any.
Yeah,
it's amazing how we connect to it.
It actually reminds me about one of the stories that you didn't have time to tell, and people often ask, which is how did this Yiddish version of Fiddler come to be? A lot of people thought it was written recently, but of course, that's not the case. The fact is that the very first non-American production of Fiddler was done in Israel, in Hebrew. It was about a year into the run of the New York production, and famous Israeli producer had just succeeded in doing his first big splashy American musical in Tel Aviv, My Fair Lady, and he was looking for his next big hit. And his translator, who was an Israeli/American guy, he sent him to New York to check out the big hits that were in New York. And the guy actually was hoping to go take a look at Forum in New York. Funny thing happened on the way to Forum. He went to see it, and unfortunately the lead, this guy Zero Mostel, was out of the show because he had taken this new job. He was working out of town on this new musical called Fiddler on the Roof. And so he wanted to really see the superstar Zero Mostel, so he jumped on a train or something, and he went down to DC, and he caught the second out-of-town tryout of Fiddler. It had been in Detroit, where it kind of bombed. We did a lot of work on it, and they came to DC, where it was much better. And Dan Almagor, I think is his name, saw it in DC, and he just kind of gushed. And it didn't quite get to Israel right away, but eventually he convinced the producer there to bring it to Israel. And before that man decided to bring it to Israel, he had one more scout. He wanted to take a look at it, a young Israeli superstar, this kid named Chaim Topol. And he had this kid who happened to be in New York doing some work, and he had him take a look at the show. And at first he hated it because Zero Mostel was back in the show and it was very shticky at the time, but then he saw a good production when Zero was more on his serious game, and he's like, yes, this needs to be in Israel. They brought it, and it ran for Israel. It ran in Hebrew for about 6 months, and then they got a new Tevye in, who was a Russian Jew who had emigrated to Israel, who spoke Yiddish as his first language. That guy did a great job, and a few weeks into, or a couple months into his run, they said, we should do this in Yiddish. So they did a Yiddish version of the show for about 2 weeks. I don't think it really did very well because Yiddish was not a very popular thing in Israel at the time. It was more of a gimmick. But anyway, the understudy of that Tevye was that same kid, Chaim Topol, who kind of got his chops playing Tevye in Hebrew in Israel before he happened to book the job in London, and the rest is history.
Yeah,
That's a great story. Max, you said that your wife said to you, you love Fiddler. What's your personal history with Fiddler? Were you ever in Fiddler, or
No.
were you involved with any productions along the way?
No, I was not. I just, my mother was a Holocaust survivor at Auschwitz, and I grew up wanting to know more about my heritage. And when I first saw it on Broadway, I came to visit my aunt and uncle, and first saw it on Broadway. I said, wow, this is unbelievable. It's talking about my people, and there's so few things about my people that presented in such a powerful way. And then I saw the film, and it really got me going, and it was, it's been part of my life since then. I've seen it like more times than I can remember, including vacuuming the living room when I sing If I Were a Rich Man. This morning.
Max, somebody's curious about how you find your topics, because the topics that you've made films about they're so varied.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I wonder if it says something about me. I don't know. Usually it's somebody that I'm interested in, not something. So, the last three films, even this Fiddler film has been about people. But before that, it was a thing for HBO called Under Fire, and a feature. And then before that, it was a PBS feature about the Morgenthau family, three generations of the Morgenthau family. And that was successful. And I just like people, and I like them to tell their stories. So I have a responsibility that I have to transfer their story to future generations.
Right.
So what my next subject is always a mystery, especially now with COVID. Who the hell knows? I mean, I know what I'm going to be doing next, but could you excuse me just for 1 second?
Sure.
I go to the loo.
Sure. Where's Bruce?
Oh.
So Max is left on screen.
There I am. Sorry.
There's Bruce. Okay. Yeah, Bruce, don't leave me now. Bruce, what are you working on, thinking post-COVID? What, and can you tell us a little bit about, you talked about this, for those of you who watched Bruce last week, he did a really wonderful panel Zoom about sort of what's going on Broadway right now. But what do you think about for the next, however long, and are you looking ahead to performing, and what are you thinking about?
Well, I certainly hope so. The timing, of course, is anybody's guess, and it's very difficult to think concretely about what might happen, and it's really hard to hear some of the social media comments from friends of mine who are kind of pulling their hair out, just with lack of knowledge about what might come next. It's really hard to for a lot of people to figure it out, including people who are trying to figure out how they can actually pay their rent. But I have been before all of this happened, I was actually working on a one-man show that was supposed to actually debut at the Rochester JCC in June. A couple of weeks ago. It would have been opening in Rochester. That, of course, didn't happen. Ralph and I are still in conversations trying to figure out when and how that might be able to become a reality. And because it's a one-man show, it has some advantages in terms of being doable. You probably know that the very first equity approved production is happening this summer at Barrington Stage in Western Massachusetts, and basically they have a couple 1 or 2 person shows. They're doing it in vastly sparse audiences, but they can do those because the casts are small and they're willing to accept the audience being far apart. So we're trying to figure out if there's something that we can do up in Rochester with a one-person show. Other than that, waiting to see what happens in terms of when theaters are able to come back online. It's going to be a very gradual and probably jerky process.
Sure. Well, when you come to Rochester, and if you debut the show here, we will be here for sure. Waiting, and we really look forward to that. Max, welcome back.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I thought because between the first call and the second call, I didn't have a chance to go to no.
Say no more. It's all good.
You gotta do what you gotta do.
You gotta do what you gotta do. Max, we're gonna wrap up pretty in a couple minutes, but you said that you know what you're working on next. Is that something that you can share?
Well, there was a number of shows, a number of films that I was going to start working on, and then everything was put on hold. But,
Come a little bit closer.
oh, I'm sorry.
Okay,
I'm
that's
too
okay.
far away. So things were just put on hold, and you know, poor production crews are having a difficult time surviving now. I'm working on a project for a documentary for the American Battle Monuments Commission about a military cemetery in Holland where about 5,000 American GIs from World War II are buried, including George Patton and all that. But it's a story about how it was designed and how the community in Holland sort of adopted all these young stars of David and crosses as family members, and they bring flowers on the birthday of the soldiers every year. And we talk about, and in the film we talk about their lives, you know, where they came from, the town they came from, and all that. And then the adopted family who sort of tries to figure out who this person was now. So, but now they're not letting any Americans into Europe, so you know, it's lucky I also have a Canadian passport.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm working on that, and another thing, virtual reality piece, and then another document. I need to work. I love to work, and I guess everybody says that. It's been bizarre to be here, trapped in this apartment for all these months. It's just crazy. I've been writing, but it's crazy. This is the craziest experience I've ever had in my life, but we have to go through it, I guess, right?
That's right. That's right. There's a final question that's addressed in the film, I think, but as a closing thought, it's a good closing thought, and that's to both of you. We can start with Bruce and then move to Max. What is it that you think ultimately is the universal appeal of Fiddler?
Yeah, clearly it's a story that has moved people for decades, and even before there was Fiddler, it was a moving story. And there are so many pieces that explain that. I mean, there's the Jewish part, you know, that says, like, this is pulling me back to something that I may have lost. And I think that a lot of, when people saw it for the first time in the 60s, I think that was part of it, that, you know, they had sort of assimilated, and they maybe felt like, oh, there's a piece of my past that I want to understand. It may not be quite accurate, but it references that. There's the, you know, the notion of tradition, trying to hold on to what we know in a changing world, and everyone understands that. And then, of course, there's just the, you know, the issue of parents and children, and everyone who is a parent or has been a child knows the relationship of, you know, between children and parents, and how parents want what's best for their kids and often believe that they know what that is, and end up learning, you know, actually what that might be from their very wise children. And I think, you know, we all have our stories that you know, that help us understand, or that we can relate to what Tevye is going through. Tevye is actually the ultimate right-wing sort of conservative who learns to be a liberal over the course, because his children teach him how. And that's sort of an interesting way to look at him, because he starts, he's like, no, this is how we do it. His children teach him, maybe not.
It's hard to change your ways.
And Max, any final thoughts on the?
The thing, Bruce said it beautifully just now, actually, and I'll just add a couple of elements. I think that the story of Peggy the Milkman and Fiddler on the Roof is a story that is so universal in terms of the human condition, how we look at certain things. So, but it's layered. So it starts with, women's rights and these young girls who have no way out and become child brides and stuff like that. And then they say no. And this was just at the time, 64, when Mystique was coming out and all that. There's the story of refugees, how we get kicked out of place both as Jews and as, Syrians and as everybody else. One way or another, we get kicked out and we have to find a new life and all that. But the strength that we get is the strength that we get from the love of our family, of our children, of our parents, of our friends, of the community. And that allows us to cope. So Bart Scher, who directed the recent Broadway show, said to me, and it's not just about the breaking of tradition, it's about learning how to cope with loss, which I use in the film, but it's learning how you cope with the loss of your children growing older. You learn how to cope with loss of friends. If somebody leaves or passes away, you learn about things that you can't have but would like to. But you learn about loss, and art helps you cope with that. And so you're able to dance, like Dylan says, under a moonlit sky with one hand, riding free and all that. Anyhow, you learn how to dance, and you learn how to sing, and that's what keeps us going. And if we could survive this, and if we could get a new president elected, I will be very happy for 2021.
Well, I thank you both so much. Max, thank you for traveling from New Jersey to Rochester over the course of the evening. And Bruce, thank you so much. Everybody in your hometown is very, very proud of you. And just want to remind you that, yeah, well, Rochester loves you. The festival continues until the 15th. We are running a couple of films today, The Crossing and, of course, Fiddler. We take a couple of days off for Shabbat, wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom. And on Sunday, we have Shared Legacies. And then we continue on, and you can check rjff.org for all of the details. And don't forget, there's a family drive-in, The Lorax by Dr. Seuss.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and tomorrow night, there's no Zoom for film, but there is a Zoom with the filmmaker and author, Barry Sonnenfeld. And
I know Barry.
Yeah. So tomorrow night, there's a Zoom. Lots of JCCs are participating. Actually, you know what, Max, I'll send you the link.
Okay.
It's going to be a great conversation.
What is he's showing a film that he did?
No, he wrote a book called Call Your Mother, Memoirs of a
I know the story about his mother, and it was at Madison Square Garden, and he was watching a rock concert, and over the loudspeaker came, Barry Sonnenfeld, call your mother. I know that whole story with... Yeah, he's done very well for himself. He's quite a character.
Yeah, well, his new book is called Call Your Mother, Memoirs of a Neurotic Filmmaker. So,
Yeah.
so tomorrow night there's going to be a great conversation with him. And I also just want to give a great big thank you to Mark Cataldi, who is working behind the scenes, making this entire virtual film festival run. It is not easy. So new territory for all. And I just thank you all so much for being here. Thanks everybody for watching tonight, and be safe and be careful out there. Wear your mask and have a great night. We will we'll see you all soon.
Bruce,
Thanks,
I was
Andrea.
sad that I didn't hear you sing the whole song.
Oh, well,
Sing
hopefully
us
they'll be
out, Bruce.
recording. They can send you the link.
I will definitely get it, but thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Max.
Same here. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you.